We're on the air. This is the Guemes Island Historical Society. This is Phil Fenner, and I'm interviewing Forrest Nelson today. Forrest has had a residence on the Indian Village shoreline on the west side of Guemes Island since approximately 1958. It's been a family gathering spot of his, this little cabin, since then. And he has some memories of his times on the island that he'd like to share with the Historical Society. How are you today, Forrest?
I'm doing very good. Thank you for asking. How are you?
Great. It's sunny out there and not even cold anymore. It's April. What do we got? The 9th of April, 2025.
Right.
These are the days, aren't they?
They are.
But the good old days for you.
So,
started back when? Way back when?
Started, for me in Guemes Island, it started in 1958. And how did we get here? And my parents were wanting a weekend or summer retreat, and they gave consideration to, we should have a place on the ocean. And we tried. In those days you didn't have the freeways, so getting to the ocean was ridiculous timing. What about a place on the river? As I recall, my parents actually had some property on a river, I want to say somewhere near Denny Creek, for a while. They considered a place on a lake, because I used to be able to go to Lake Chelan with my parents and family almost every summer. My dad would go there for business, and we'd stay at Campbell's Resort, and then we'd get kind of a vacation time together as well.
I know Campbell's Resort, been there a few times myself.
And we tried a boat, and the boat idea was just a little runabout, but that was not really working as any sort of a weekend activity that we could do. And as I recall, this is a story from my mother, is that she was explaining to her work friends. She worked part-time as a registrar at the University of Washington. So she was explaining to her friends there that their desire for a weekend retreat. And this one lady, and I believe it was Marty Allison, who explained, I have the perfect place for you. And this is in January or early February. And you'll have to come visit us at Guemes Island. And the Allisons lived together with the Whites. So it was Marty and Tommy Allison and Mike and Dottie White, and their this lady's sisters was Rose Carlton, and they're just a few doors north of me here at Indian Village, or were a few doors north of me at Indian Village. And we drove up to Guemes on, I don't know if it was a Saturday or Sunday, it doesn't matter, but it was in February, and it was rainy. And I think we missed the last morning ferry to Guemes, so we had to wait until 1 o'clock. And of course, in those days, it was the old Guemes ferry, which I think held 6 cars.
Almar? Perhaps?
No, this was before the Almar. This was the Guemes ferry.
Okay.
If you go into the office in Anacortes, you will see the Guemes ferry. And it took off from Bryant Marina there in Anacortes and came over to the Guemes. But it was, again, back to the story, February weekend day, rainy, came down to the Allisons, and my parents told us to stay in the car. This property that our cabin is on now was for sale, and we got to get out of the car and walk over here to the property. And this lot and the adjoining lot was owned by a gentleman by the name of Meager. I'm not certain how to spell that, and can't even remember his first name right now, but his idea for the property was a fishing resort. So he had 7 little cabins that he partially constructed. They were a main room and 2 bedrooms. No indoor plumbing. The cabins were never finished. They were just studs, a kind of a shiplap siding, and a simple roof that was in some cases never finished, so it leaked. The floors were never finished, so there was knot holes in the floor so critters could get in. But he and his family were staying in one of the cabins, and this lot that we're on now had a cabin on it, and we got to wander around. And in those days, the natural beach grass, and I wish I knew the name of the type of beach grass it is, but it's this long bladed grass. That was the entire vegetation that was on this beach, and it was as tall as I was a kid, and I was 6 years old at the time. Well, actually, I wasn't even quite 6. I was 5 3/4 or thereabouts. And got to see this place, and I didn't know what was going to happen with my parents about this, but went home back to Seattle, and the next day was a normal work day for my dad, and I don't remember, I must have been maybe in kindergarten at that time or something along that line, but the story as it was relayed to me and years later was that my dad came home from work that day, and he had been to a bookstore in downtown Seattle, and he bought a book on cabins. Well, my mom had been to the Seattle Public Library, and she too had come home from the library with books on cabins. And I was told that given the fact that they both had the same idea in mind, that it was settled that they were going to buy this 50-foot piece of property on Guemes Island.
Luckily, did not have a cabin on it, so you didn't have to buy one of those.
No, we got the cabin.
Little shanties?
We got one of the shanties that was on on the property, and I could share a picture with you one of these days that I'll send over to you of the cabin after my dad had done some fixing up on it. It was, made it somewhat livable as a cabin, and but occasionally we would have that extra critter visiting us, like the night that a bat got into that cabin and they had to chase it out. But it got a coat of paint, it got a decent roll tar roof on it, etc. But it was after a couple of years of living in that cabin and continuing to use an outhouse and no hot water. We did have a water spigot in the house and a sink so that you could make meals in the cabin, but
like a wood stove in the kitchen, maybe?
No, we actually had a old electric range that, if you can imagine the ranges in those days, they had stood off the floor, and they had 4 legs that stood up on the corners, and the oven was at one end of it, and you had these burners, and they looked like wire coils that were wound up. My dad would go to St. Vincent de Paul in Seattle to get parts for it, and
but you had electricity.
Not originally. We got electricity in the first year. It was probably the first year that we got electricity from our neighbor by running Joe Flo, who ran an extension cord from his boathouse garage next door into our place, and we were able to have a light and have a radio that we could listen to, and we did have a electric space heater, but if we occasionally we would blow a fuse at Joe Flo's place, and we'd have to go put in a new fuse so that we could get the lights going again. But I don't remember when we actually got a power pole was installed and we had power to the cabin. But it was after a couple years, about 1960, that my parents decided that no, we couldn't live in that cabin forever. We needed something more permanent, that we could have space for myself and my two sisters, and indoor plumbing, etc., and a real fireplace, and blah, blah, blah. And they decided, investigating, they decided on a Lindell Cedar home.
Oh, Lindell Cedar home.
So that's what we have here today.
That's what this is.
And as I said, the walls are solid cedar. It's vertical, and they started putting that up in 1961. And the building of this cabin, and in fact, even the maintenance of the previous cabin that was left over from Meager, everything that happened here, it was done by my father himself, or with friends of my parents, or neighbors here at Guemes, or friends of my folks, and our extended family. My dad's sisters and their husband would help us out here. So this place is major, built by my parents and their friends, and putting this foundation for this cabin in was the day that pouring the foundation. You didn't bring a concrete truck onto the island. My dad and I, and mostly my dad, had brought gravel up from the beach that he'd been building a pile out in front here for months. And then one weekend day they decided to start pouring the foundation, and it was a group effort of our neighbors who bought out Meager's other property, Bill and Marge Brown and their 4 boys, Dan the oldest, Greg, Bill, David, and Clay was the youngest. But the older Brown boys and Bill Brown, my uncle, my dad's sister's husband, Wayne Killinger, who was also a resident here on Guemes, they helped pour this foundation, and it was made, I can remember in the evening, 6:30, 7 p.m. in the evening, and my dad was finishing topping out the foundation for this cabin that went in. Another weekend, the foundation for the fireplace was poured as well. And then the cabin was, they started building the cabin, and getting materials onto the island for this was a trek, because Lindell Cedar Homes, they put everything on a dual trailer semi-truck with the expectation of being able to bring it over to Guemes, and they found out they couldn't do that. And we were lucky enough that George Humble of Copeland Lumber, and George Humble also had a place here on Guemes, right where the store is, and his original cabin is still there. But he allowed Lindell Cedar Homes to use their lumber yard to unload the lumber from Lindell's trucks and put it on a truck or two of Copeland Lumber that could fit onto the Guemes ferry and bring it over here to Guemes.
That's miraculous.
And of course, any other lumber that we needed, we purchased from Copeland Lumber.
Yeah, of course.
So anyway,
Wow.
That's how this place was built. And
I remember hearing that until the current Guemes ferry came along, you couldn't get a concrete truck one of those big rotating concrete trucks. You just couldn't get that to the island. And I mean, you have to hire a barge if you wanted to try to do that. So there was one or two old concrete trucks on the island, and they somehow managed to supply occasional needs for concrete on the island. But,
In this case, my parents, in making concrete, they had two of those mixers that was on wheels.
The home mixers.
A home
Yeah.
mixer. Yeah. And one of our neighbors had one here, and somebody else on the beach had one here, and so we got two of them staged out front. And again, it was the boys' effort, Bill Brown and his sons, but I believe it was Dan, the oldest boy, who was primarily mixing the concrete, and I don't remember who actually was putting it in the wheelbarrows and bringing it over, but I do remember my uncle tamping concrete as it was going into the form so that there wasn't any gaps, etc.
Yep.
Anyway, the cabin was built. Again, friends of my folks helped wire the place. And this fireplace, the bricks for this fireplace are all hand recovered, used bricks recovered by my parents. And we spent evening upon evening with my dad coming home from work, my mom coming home from the University of Washington, jumping into both cars, and we'd go to a construction location where a building had been demolished and stacking bricks in the back of the cars and taking them back home to our home in Seattle, stacking them up. And then another effort was my dad then taking chisels and chipping off the old mortar and cleaning them up. And guess what? Then they get to be restacked in the back of the car to come up to Guemes Island, where they got stacked again until they were ready to build this fireplace. I can't tell you what year this fireplace was built, but it was probably in the spring of 1961 or maybe the spring of 1962. But two bricklayers came up. My dad made the mortar for the bricks. I don't remember who brought it in, but I do remember that myself and my sisters, and again I go back to the Allisons and the Whites, who came down and helped carry bricks into the house. And as fast as we could bring the bricks into the house and my dad could mix the mortar, they built this fireplace. It was in February. We lucked out a beautiful day. They got up to about the top of the roof, and then they had to come back on Sunday and finish it. And on Sunday, it was another gorgeous sunny day. The bricklayers brought their family. They finished the rest of the chimney in a matter of hours, and then everybody celebrated, and we had a picnic lunch out on the beach in February. So anyway, that's how this fireplace was built, again, with the help of these wonderful neighbors and family that did this. So anyway, that's how the house came to be, and it was just a continuous project for years building this house cabin, and it's basically pretty much as my father had designed, with the exception that the upstairs there was only going to be a one-room loft upstairs. But they decided to build this little sky bridge over to the loft area above the kitchen and bathroom, and that area, the area to the north across this little bridge, was my bedroom, and my two sisters had the loft above the master bedroom behind us.
I can visualize it.
So we got a septic tank installed about 1964 or 65. Again, another one of those late winter days or early spring days. I got a special excuse to get out of school. I think I was in the 5th grade when this happened, to come up here to Guemes Island to watch the crew on a Friday put in the septic tank in the drain field. So until then, we were still using the outhouse up on the hill.
Is that the septic system that Adam was just now working on?
Well, Adam's not working on the septic tank
he's
right
not.
now. Adam is restoring the shoreline, which this last winter, due to a king tide and the high windstorms that we had concurrent with that, much of the waves literally came into people's yards here and took out half their lawns in some cases. And Adam has restored that for us, so that we now have he's reseeding so that the lawn will go back out to where the original high tide mark was.
Right.
So that's going on right now.
Yeah, our house is about 50 feet up the slope above the end of Eden's road. But there's houses that are similarly placed like this, right down below us.
Right
in front of the water. And they all have all the same problems you're talking about.
Right.
Some of them get flooded, into the house.
Into the house. Well, this house here was originally built. It was 18 inches lower when it was originally built. I do remember it was about 1965, 66. My dad built this front deck, and it's still the original deck. The family helped him. Other Boy Scout friends of mine, who my parents became friends with, those parents, they were up here helping us build this deck. But we got a call one winter day in Seattle from Pete Bone. Pete Bone lived to the south of us here, and he reported that our front deck had floated away. Well, that wasn't quite true, but we came up here and the front deck had literally been floating, but it did not float away because it had been toenailed to the front of the cabin. So it did damage to the front fascia under the at the top of the foundation wall, but it didn't float away.
Well, I found a note in the Evening Star. That name rang a bell, Pete Bone. So April 1995, Pete and Jackie Bone's house stands on the site of the last great Indian lawn house at Indian Village, according to Wynn. We leave it up to Jim Nelson. Any connection with you?
No.
No. Another Nelson. Then he just jokes. He says, we leave it up to Jim Nelson to find out how Hog Island got its name. And that's a reference to a little island somewhere in Asia that Wynn Anderson thought was funny, that our name was Dog Island and its name was Hog Island. There must be a connection. Wynn we just go off on funny tangents. But that's where I saw this bone. So it's near here, but...
Pete Bone owned property down
just
south of
here.
Indian Village.
Okay.
If you drive on West Shore Road here,
Right.
just south of Indian Village Lane, there is a huge house structure that is elevated and sits up very high, and there's literally two houses there, one stacked on top of the other with Pete, when he built something, he really went all out and built it big and complete. But
Well, I wonder where Wynn got the idea that that's where the Indian Longhouse was.
I wouldn't be surprised that the longhouse could have been anywhere down there where Pete and Shorty Rossiter's place was, and or literally right here, because my understanding is there's an Indian graveyard.
Well, that's the other reference I saw.
Just to the north of the Jim Morrison property, and if you go to the Skagit County land parcel site, I think you can click on land parcels and one of them will pop up, and identify it as a Indian burial ground.
Really?
So,
Well, in June of 2012,
yeah,
Wynn reported no, this is the tide, so this would have been Edith. Edith Walden's tide.
Yeah.
Yeah, June 2012. RE, the Clark Point fire. Rumors are that the property is the site of an Indian burial ground, but those are unsubstantiated according to island historian Wynn Anderson. He noted that there is a burial site more than a half-mile south of the property, and that the expansive Samish longhouse existed even further south in what is now known as the Indian Village community.
Yeah, and that's my understanding. The story that I understood is that the Indian longhouse was right here in this part of the beach, but the burial ground is north of Jim Morrison's property. And I will take a look at the Skagit County parcel site, and if I can find it for you, I will send that link to you. But
and of course, that would have been one of the places Bubble would have gone to get her skull collection.
okay, I'm glad you brought that up because I wasn't going to mention that, but that is correct. Bubble, yes, as a kid, used to be able to go down and visit Bubble, and yes, she literally had parties, and the kids went to her parties, and she did have. I do remember at least one, if not two, skulls that were there, and yeah,
those were the days. Huh?
Yeah. But back to where I was before, this house was 18 inches lower, and it flooded. It flooded in the mid 60s. It flooded a second time in late 60s, and in early 70s, about 71, 72. Well, it had to be 72, 73. Another flood, and we got water in the house, and my dad was very, very mad, upset, and I was not living at home anymore, and the next day I went to work, and before I actually started working, I dug out the yellow pages and I looked up house movers. And I called up this one house mover, and I asked him, I said, just listen to me for a minute. I want to describe a situation and get some input from you. And I described what had happened, and I says, what do you think it would take to lift this house so it's a higher elevation? And he says, okay, describe the house to me. And I described the house to him. He says, what's the access like around the house? What's the amount of space that you have in the foundation area? And he says, sounds really good. You don't have anything built to the south of you. You've got clear yard in the front of you. You've got clear access in the back. He says, yes, we can do that. And I says, the bummer of the deal, though, is there's this huge fireplace in the middle of the house that's probably going to mess things up. He says, no. He says, actually, that's wonderful. He says, how about the access around the foundation for the fireplace? I says, oh, yeah, there's a close to 3 feet of workspace underneath the house. A decent crawl space down there. And he says, that's great. He says, don't quote me on this, of course, because I haven't seen it, but he says, I can't imagine it would cost more than X dollars. And I says, wow, that's great. So that night, I went back up to my folks' house in Seattle, and I says, I did this. I called a house mover, and this is what he told me. Well, within 2 months, my dad had a contract with a house mover up here, and they literally lifted this house. Wow. And my mother and dad were staying here while the house was being elevated.
No.
Yes. And my mother was in the kitchen cooking while this house was literally being jacked up.
Wait a minute. They have to unhook all the pipes and wires and everything.
They loosened the wiring was overhead at that time, so the wiring just went up with the house.
Okay.
The water supply was a flexible PVC flex line type stuff.
Okay.
I can't remember what you call that type of pipe, but they dug up enough of it so that they had the flex to do it.
Swing they needed.
Yeah. So anyway, the only thing that had to be disconnected was the sewer line
Sewers are
to the septic tank. So you couldn't use the toilet, you couldn't flush any water down the sink or anything like that. But my mom and dad literally were here while the house was being raised. The fireplace went up at the same time. Yeah, it's just as it was. So they lifted the house, and then they put 2 levels of cinder blocks on top of the foundation, set the house back down on the cinder blocks, pulled out the steel beams, patched up the holes in the cinder blocks, patched up the holes in the foundation for the fireplace. And
how long did that take altogether?
I don't...
A couple months in the summer?
It was in the spring again. It was one of those springtime projects. I don't think it took more than about 3 weeks.
Wow.
For all that work. I mean, the house movers were very quick, but the rest of the work of reconnecting the sewer line and doing the proper connection for the water line, etc., took a little bit longer. And then the flower beds had to be rebuilt on the outside of the house, and the front deck, it had to be lifted separately.
Okay. Well, you'd never know. Look at it.
Yeah, the deck, they literally took the front deck, which runs the majority of the front of the house. They literally took it and just drug it out onto the front lawn away from the house so they could work and lift the house. And then how it got back here, I don't know.
Where's the seal?
Oh, really?
He just dove, of course.
Dove, of course.
They dive 2 seconds after you see him.
Oh, wow. Anyway, so that... that kind of the history of the house here. Oh, there he is.
Yeah.
Oh, he's a big one.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah. He looks like he's been eating well. So
crustaceans. It must be plentiful.
Anyway.
Okay.
So that takes us up to the early 70s. And, of course, as I relayed to you, you saw in... What's Up Guemes on Facebook was my story about the vacation up here.
Oh, yeah.
I had an opportunity to travel a little bit in my job in Seattle. But, when it came to a vacation, I was not one for wanting to go to Hawaii or to New York or Chicago or places like that. My idea of a vacation was to come up here and relax. And there was that one summer in the late 70s, and my parents were going to go on a trip to Alaska, kind of another combination vacation and work trip. And they were going to be gone for 2 weeks, and I decided I was going to schedule my vacation to come up to the cabin for those 2 weeks, and I was going to have my friends from work join me for one of the weekends and have a little picnic barbecue here for my work friends. But then discovered that the ferry crew for the Almar had gone on strike. So I was lucky enough to be able to come up here, park my little Volkswagen in Anacortes, walk down to Bryant Marina, and there were kids who were running little outboard boats from Bryant Marina to Guemes Island so that people could get over to the island.
Well, I was wondering how you got here, because you say the Almar crew was on strike, and then you just say it was peaceful, there were a few cars and beautiful weather. I'm like, well, how'd you get over here?
Well, I was lucky enough. I can't remember how much money they were asking. The kids were asking to cross the channel, but it was like, $2, or something like that to get across, and I'd gladly give that to them. And I was prepared to walk from the ferry dock to the cabin here, but I says, if I gave you $5, would you take me around to Indian Village on the west side of Guemes? And he says, I'll do it. And so he delivered me in his little outboard boat right here on the beach. And that's where I spent my 2-week summer vacation. And it was wonderful. And then the weekend before my vacation was to be up, the crew settled and went back to work. And I was able to reschedule my friends to come over here for that last weekend and have a barbecue at Guemes. And anyway, that's kind of where it was.
So the strike ended, and that gave you a magic carpet off the island without having to go.
Right. I still had to have somebody. Well, I actually got to the ferry, down to the ferry dock before the end of the week, and walked over to Bryant's, grabbed my Volkswagen, went to the grocery store, got some fresh hamburger meat and hot dog buns, blah blah blah, for my picnic friends,
right.
And brought the Volkswagen over to the island then for that last weekend. But that's how I spent my vacation. So anyway, yep. Anyway, that was it was a great, enjoyable time.
This is funny because one of the other people on the new Historical Society is Bill Van Vlack.
Oh, Bill Van Vlack. I worked with Bill.
And I was just talking to him this morning about something else, and I said, I'm going to go interview Forrest Nelson. I had no idea that you two knew each other. And he goes, well, tell him, the Sparling Tech Group. Apparently you had you spent some time working for them.
I worked with Sparling for a number of years from, mid 1990s until early 2000s, and Bill Van Vlack was one of the people that I worked with. No, he bought that property before, while he was still working for Sparling, as I recall.
Oh, he did. Well, I haven't interviewed him yet.
Well, you'll have to interview him because he's been up here for a long time.
Well, I did find this. Speaking of technical stuff, work stuff, in June 2009 in the Evening Star by Wynn Anderson, there's a long full-page article on Internet Upgrade, which was at the time called Too Little and Too Expensive. And in here it says that a Guemes Island Internet TV Advisory Committee, GETAC, was formed at a public meeting. The group dedicated itself to assisting index cable to stay in business, and members included Forrest Nelson, who is described as being a professional designer of broadband distribution systems for companies like Microsoft, Fred Hutch, and Amgen. And his assessment of Index's problem was that their T1 line could be and should be replaced with an antenna system that would cut costs by 2/3 while providing at least 100 megabytes of bandwidth, and that which would be a giant leap above Index Cable's latest upgrade. But instead, Index opted to have Verizon install a new line from Mangan's Landing to the mountain, which required, and this goes on and on and on. I'll send you this and you'll get a kick out of it.
I can very well remember helping out on that.
Okay.
And the problem in those days was that last link between the island and the mainland for your internet connection.
Well, that's an important
because
link.
you come down to that one pipe, and
Yep.
it's expensive, and I don't believe they had fiber optics to the island in those days. So I actually looked into what was called free space optics, and optical connection using, the best way I can describe it is using like a laser equivalent device between the mainland and Guemes Mountain. And but Index sold out to San Juan Cable instead of maintaining their own business. So
Yeah, I found articles just saying they were basically unable to sustain their business, and it was up for sale. And if somebody didn't buy it, it was just gonna go away at the end of the year.
yeah, no, I had even found another organization that was potentially interested in buying Index Cable, but unfortunately Index found San Juan Cable as a buyer before I was able to get a conversation really going between the potential buyer.
Interesting. Well, In the Evening Star in November of '08, Index Cable announces that it will shut down by the end of that year because basically it's up for sale, or otherwise we're just going to pull the plug. Then there's a gap in coverage between the Evening Star that ends in '09 and the Tide that begins in 2013. And by the time the Tide starts up, they're all just referring to San Juan Cable. So my only conclusion is that the switchover between the two happened sometime between '09 and '13.
Yeah, and the gentleman that was Index Cable was owned by a man and a woman, and they
Varhaugs.
And yeah,
Varhaug.
And I don't know if they still own the land where the antenna farm is up on the near south of Guemes Mountain or not. But their son who was operating the cable system after his father passed, and he was the one that
Matt Varhaug.
Yeah, and he and his mother sold it to San Juan Cable. And Matt went to work for San Juan. How long he worked for San Juan, I don't know, but he kind of helped make the transition. So,
and I was able to dive into saved pages from Line Time, the old Line Time, that are still on archive.org, if you're familiar with the Internet Archive.
No.
Oh, you'd enjoy that. Archive.org has the concept is that it goes out and saves the code from web pages at regular intervals, so that if something happens, you can at least go back and see what was on those pages. You can't necessarily interact with everything, but at least you can see most of the pages.
Wow.
Yeah, and they do it for the entire internet, and of course, you never know if something's going to be there or not when you go looking for it, but Line Time, actually, they sampled it pretty regularly over a period of 5 or 6 years, and that happened to be right during this time. And so I was able to find, they did a fair amount of coverage of the internet problem on the island, including comparison charts of what various services cost versus their speed, and announcements of the shutdown of Index Cable and so on.
Right.
So I'm still digging further into that, trying to find the announcement of the new San Juan Cable acquisition of the old infrastructure, and how it finally, because the cable speed back then with Index Cable was slower than DSL.
Yeah.
And now, of course, DSL is left in the dust by the current cable service over the same cable. So something must obviously have improved dramatically between the mainland and the island in order to make that possible. It's all interesting to me, but it's trivial.
Yeah.
Since you happen to have been involved at the time.
I myself gave up San Juan Cable several years ago, and I became a Ziply DSL user myself.
You did.
And because the problem with San Juan was that, again, that backhaul off the island, that at certain times of the day that it would slow down because of the amount of traffic. Everybody cramming into that one pipe off the island. And and the other thing is that San Juan, getting signal out to this area, you are relying on line amplifiers on poles every so often, and where do they get their power? They get their power from PSE, and you get a branch through the line or something like that, it fails. So didn't make much difference where the power outage was on Guemes. It would kill my internet. So what I found was that Ziply's DSL, while the speed isn't that great, it works more reliably through power interruptions than San Juan. Well, I don't know what else I can talk about for you on Guemes. I can possibly be a source of information for some of the early residents of Indian Village here. Mm-hmm. Again, I mentioned to you Morrison and Allisons and the Whites that lived to the north of us here. Ann and Doc Richards, who lived one house north of the Allisons, Whites. Ziegler, Flo, Mitchell, Madden, Munsell.
Munsell. Now I found an obit for Adriana Munsell.
Well, Bob Munsell passed away just this last year,
Oh.
and his memorial service was this last summer. So it was about this time last year that Bob Munsell passed. I think he was 84 or 85. Bob's family had been here since the 40s, as I recall.
Well, this was in 2016.
Yeah, Adriana.
Indian Village neighbors remember her as always being available to help with needs of car repair, car rides, boat repair, paper towels, sea salt, and computer help.
Yeah.
Or welcomed with a hug, a drink, and even a meal while dropping in to watch a Mariners game.
But, their parents, this is where I'm really bad, is remembering names off the top of my head.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll remember the name at another time. And I am now taking notes for myself, and I put them in a log. So I have a log of people's names of who I've encountered and who are memorable to me during my lifetime. So
yeah, that's what I do. Yeah.
But Bob Munsell's parents, he was a firefighter, and his wife was this very nice woman. I want to say her name was Alice Munsell, which would have been Bob Munsell's mother.
Okay. So Bob Munsell, who died a year ago,
Yeah.
was he Adriana's husband?
Yes.
Okay. But we're not talking about Bob's father, the firefighter?
Bob's father was a firefighter, fire chief in Seattle.
Oh, in Seattle.
Yeah. And Madden, who lives 2 doors to the north of the Munsells, his father, Troy Madden, was a fire chief in Seattle. They've owned property here on the island since the 1940s. His son, Mark Madden, owns the property now, and his son is currently living in the cabin. The Mitchells have, and their daughter, Joanne and Michael Gray, Mitchells bought about 1959. Flows to the north of me, they bought sometime in the 40s. I can remember names and a little bit about people if you want me to help fill in blanks here and there.
Well, looking for anything about Indian Village, I did find the names Joanne and Michael Gray.
Yep.
In the September 16 issue of The Tide. It says Joanne and Michael Gray of Indian Village posted a message on What's Up Guemes, which must have been active by that time, supporting Everett's concerns and charging that GPAC was not elected or appointed via a publicized electoral process, and that their surreptitious efforts were destructive of property rights and values, and that GPAC did not represent them or their neighbors. So this is part of the area planning process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In particular, there was a controversy about the building envelope limitations that GPAC had helped get passed with Skagit County. And that building envelope limitation that was specific to Guemes Island was removed in the last 2 years or so.
This would be like setbacks and height limits and sort of.
Yeah, it has setbacks, and I don't believe that's so much the issue. It was the building height limitations.
Yes.
The thing is for people like myself on these narrow lots these lots have got a low ground level elevation, that the overall side height of the building is calculated on that ground level outside the house. And so, like in this case, the ground elevation is actually higher at the shoreline, and it slopes back because this was a swamp at one time. And so you couldn't build more than, I believe it was 12 feet off the ground on the sidewalls. And you could have higher in the center, but for people with narrow lots, that posed a problem. But that restriction has been removed. I don't know what the new building code thing is, but I believe that if we had tried to build this cabin as you see it today,
Right.
Under those building envelope limitations, that this cabin would not have been permitted.
Yeah, wow.
So, anyway.
And then there was a Bob Mitchell.
Bob Mitchell was Joanne's father.
Oh, Joanne Gray's father.
Joanne Gray's father. And Joanne has got two sisters, older sisters, Susie and Nancy. And Susie and Todd, her husband, used to spend many summers coming up here and enjoying the cabin that Bob and Dorothy Mitchell built.
It says that they built their cabin in 1959, so it was right in parallel with yours.
Yeah. We bought in 58, they bought in 59.
Great.
So.
And he was a World War II veteran, and he did the flagpole thing. That was the reason for the write-up in the paper, was this flagpole thing that he built from scrap. Apparently, he'd been collecting lamppost poles left over by Seattle City Light, and tying them to the top of his car and driving them up here. And he assembled this thing that looks like a ship's mast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Joanne and Michael Gray took that down.
Yeah, I remember seeing it.
It was here 3-4 years ago, but they took it down for one reason or another.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Sorry.
there's a picture of it in the Tide.
Yeah. But yeah, I can remember names of people going down south. I don't know if you've got a note anywhere, and I don't know that this would be relevant or not, but there were some people to the south of us here by the name of Howell. They had a cabin, and it had a clear story. That our clear story on this house faces to the beach. The Howells faced back uphill, but what's interesting about the Howells is either they lived in Anacortes at one time, or they knew a friend of theirs that lived in Anacortes one time, and people living in Anacortes were the people responsible for Bobo the gorilla.
Oh yeah.
At the Woodland Park Zoo, and Bobo actually lived in the house in Anacortes. And
Yes.
I can drive by and point to you. That's the house where these people lived.
And they raised it as an infant and taught it to do all sorts of things, just like a baby.
Yeah, except
like a child.
that of course
It didn't work out in the long run, but
it got too big, and
Yeah.
and then they had to give it to the
to the zoo.
zoo.
Yeah, that's a great story. There's a mural of Bobo, life-size mural of Bobo out in front of the Anacortes Museum.
Ah, cool.
He just looks like an ape of some kind, but then it's like, oh, well, that has to be Bobo.
Yeah.
Of course.
So
Anyways,
anyway,
good stories.
yeah.
Now, your water supply here, is it part of the reverse osmosis system?
No, it is not.
That's to the south of here.
That's to the south of
Okay.
us. That's in the Potlatch Lane area.
Potlatch Lane.
Potlatch Lane and Salmon Run.
Salmon Run.
I'm not certain how much Salmon Run is even on that reverse osmosis. We were lucky enough that Meager had hand dug a well up here behind us, and I still use that well.
And the water's still sweet, huh?
It is by far the best water,
And yet right down here they have so much salt they have to
Yeah.
desalinate.
we don't have that problem. I do recall there's been a couple very dry summers where the water in the fall has gotten a touch tastish, but generally
Tasty.
you have good winter rainfalls,
Yeah.
and with no homes on the uphill side of us
Oh, right.
competing for water.
Yep.
Um,
Because this far north, Totem Trail ends,
yeah,
and there's no more housing on the other side of the highway.
Correct.
It's all just forest up there.
yep,
Is your well on this side of the highway? Or
it's
not?
on this
It's
side
on
of the
this
highway.
side.
Yeah. So I've got a hand dug well. Martin Flo's got a hand dug well. There are other people who have drilled wells.
And they're
Mitchell's got a hand dug well, as I recall. Mark Madden's got a hand dug well. Mark Madden, by chance, his well probably dug by his father, Troy. When we first came up here, before we got connected to our own well up here, those first year or so that we had to get water, we went up to the Madden's well, and they have an old-fashioned hand pump
Yeah, no kidding.
outside the well,
Wow.
and we'd fill up gallon glass jugs of water and bring it back down to the cabin. And that's what we used until my dad was able to connect to the well that was up here.
So there was a well up here, then you finally connected to it. You didn't have to, it was pre-dug when you arrived.
Yeah, it was pre-dug, and I believe Meager had water running to his cabin, but there was not water running to our cabin. And I recall my dad hand digging the trench to get the water from the well down to this cabin area here. So anyway, so I can't think of anything else that comes immediately to mind, but that's my history in brief with why I'm here today.
Okay.
So
You got a couple of good-sized trees out here. Were these trees here all along?
yeah, these trees were here all along, and there was another tree here in this. The people living immediately to the south of me, their name is Jewel.
Yeah.
They bought from Brown. Brown bought from Meager, but they had a fir tree, but it wasn't as big as one of these. But so I've got this fir tree, and the Flo has got this fir tree, and they've been here, this whole time. And we have no desire to cut them down.
By golly, you're going to hang on to it for a while.
Yeah. Well,
Good.
Unfortunately, yeah, there's been other people who have had trees in their front yards, and they've cut them down for one reason or another. It's nothing but a bunch of gnarly old branches.
Well, it gets the wind and yeah.
So
Gnarly.
And the reason it's got that huge bump on the side of it is because Meager had strapped a steel cable to the tree, and used the tree as the anchor point for winching in boats.
Oh, yeah.
And so it dug into the tree and damaged it. So it's
Yeah.
all these years that it's been there, it oozes pitch out of that wound area.
Yep.
And it doesn't seem to affect it, but that's what's going on.
Well, the good news is that and all those big old branches will make it not merchantable.
Yeah.
Nobody will want to mill it, so it'll be safe.
Right.
And you got a big rock there. That could be one of those glacial erratics.
Actually, that rock, it was buried over here behind Jules. Well, it would be under the corner of Jules' house. When they tore down the old cabins that had been here from Meager days to build this house, that rock was in the way of the foundation.
Sure.
And so they
dragged it out there.
The heavy equipment they had up here was able to drag it out that far, and they just set it there.
Well, it's still a glacial erratic, though.
Yeah.
Well, good to talk to you, Forrest. Thanks for taking the time.
No, you're quite welcome, sir.
Signing off.